The world of Fear and Hunger is perfectly normal, cosmic gods aside, and in the 1940s we find a world that has advanced similarly to our own since the first game, but in certain sectors has seen a decline. It's hard to judge the cultural pulse of the world based purely on the city of Preheville, as every reference we find on it in-game refers to it as backwards in comparison to most of Europa. But we can get a broader picture of the world by looking at the characters on the train. First of all, women's rights seem to have progressed a lot faster in Termina's world than it did in our own. In Abella and Karen we meet career women in their 20s, with one being an engineer and the other a journalist. Olivia is studying at university, and Marina is studying at the Vatican to be a dark priest. Professional women weren't completely unheard of in the mid-20th century of our world, but they certainly weren't this ubiquitous either. On the subject of Olivia, she's also the victim of a debilitating illness, leaving her wheelchair-bound. The medical knowledge existed to help her, but her parents were superstitious and backwards, which is our first suggestion that there is a conflict between the modern world and the old. With Tanaka, we meet a young businessman from East Asia, and he's in Preheville for a business trip, which indicates that international shipping lanes are opening up around the world, and even the seemingly insignificant nation of Bohemia is benefiting from it. In Marco and Cagliura, we have two very different men from the criminal underground of the Vatican, which seems to be the Fear and Hunger equivalent of Italy. Unlike in our own world, where the Vatican City and Italy are technically distinct entities, the world has also moved away from more archaic forms of government like the divine right of kings. While the Kingdom of Rondon still exists, it isn't the strongest nation on the earth anymore, and the royal family are hardly mentioned in-game at all, unlike in the first game, where the Crown Prince has a minor place in the story, if only to highlight the insignificance of such a concept in the true grand scheme of things. The most important political character in the game's story is the Kaiser, a man who became leader of the Bremen Empire via populist uprising, and while the Bremen are meant to invoke the National Socialists of Germany, one could also draw parallels to Lenin and his revolution, especially in how the Kaiser treated the old aristocracy of Bremen, either ousting them or outright murdering them in many cases. As discussed previously, Termina takes place shortly after the end of the Second Great War, and in its aftermath the psyche of the ordinary people of the world had been severely scarred, allowing the modern world to be breached by the old. In our contemporary world, the Gregorian calendar, which we use every day, comes from the Pope, Gregory Gregorface, and the Fear and Hunger calendar seems to be similar in its theory, considering the birth of Jesus as the year zero. According to the book, The Four Ages of Mankind, Ulmer re-established the worship of the old gods during his age, and that he killed the new gods and kings who were alive at the time, which means that the old gods have left the Earth and Mahab long before the year zero. Yet even in the 20th century, thousands of years after these events, the power of the old gods is very real. Diminished, but real, and the entire foundation of the world was built upon these beings, with Ulmer re-establishing their worship during his reign, and the new gods doing everything in their power to escape their influence during theirs. Even the god of Fear and Hunger had to usurp the power of one to push humanity forward, and it's here we see, when we analyse the history of the world, an ever-ongoing conflict. The old gods and the old ways, and humanity's desperate need to escape them, through enlightenment and science. Termina's overarching story is about this conflict. The old world of the old gods clashing with the new world of the Ascended Ones, and which is ultimately the better path for humanity. We can see the consequences of these conflicting theses. Olivia's paralysis is the direct result of it, but the conflict isn't always so destructive. In Dawn, who is described by some as a fake doctor, we find a man who was orphaned from a very early age, and taken into the household of aristocracy. The man who took Dawn in taught him about modern science, in exchange for occult knowledge from the young boy, whose parents were cultists of the old god Sylvan. At the outset of the war, he's recruited and sent to the front, where he serves as a battlefield doctor, and it's here where he develops new methods of medicine by combining the powers of the old gods with his contemporary education. Medical medicinal is a unique ability where Dawn can sacrifice a body part of his to bring somebody back from the dead. Likewise, Dawn's surgical knowledge allows him to harvest organs, which he can use to heal an afflicted part of his own body. So in Dawn we see a unique fusion of the modern world of human technology meeting the esoteric power of the gods. A strange synthesis of the two seemingly conflicting theses, which contrasts with Olivia's own experience, where the synthesis of the conflict caused harm, but there are some aspects of the occult and the old ways that remain untainted by modernity. The dominant religion of the world is Olma worship, and the central figure in promoting it is the Vatican. And the beliefs of the Vatican, even the more esoteric and superstitious ones, have a way of bleeding down into the wider culture of the world. For example, there was a widespread belief in the 17th century that vampires existed in Europa, with at least one unique sword being created to ensure their destruction, Sabbath, which can be found on the Church of Olma's rafters, if one can find the right path to it. We know that this was a belief specifically held and pushed by the Vatican based on Sabbath's item description. These swords were wielded by penitence warriors, which were created by the Vatican to be warriors driven by pure pain and fury. Their armoured suits were effectively Iron Maidens that tortured and mutilated their users while being worn. Once locked inside, there was no way out. Poor souls would be shoved into these suits, and their only escape was death. It's unknown whether there was any truth to the claims of vampires stalking the country, though people like the great scholar Enki Karian and the Kaiser are said to be older than should be possible. Regardless, Olma worship isn't the exclusive religion of the world. In fact, we get many different glimpses of the world's religions throughout Termina. For example, the people of Abyssinia, the game's equivalent of the African continent, believe in the old gods, but don't venerate or worship them. Instead, they look at the old gods as alien beings that are interlopers on the planet Earth. We also have Yagagetsu, an Eastern god, who seems to be a patron deity of warriors. It's said that wearing one of the being's dedicated amulets makes one more deadly in combat. And of course we have the priests of Preheville. Preheville is an old place. Its tower that stands in the city's centre is older than recorded human history, and from the sigil drawn in its centre, it clearly stands in reverence to the moon god Rare. The true power behind Preheville are its priests, who seem to worship all kinds of deities, though they profess to be Olma worshippers exclusively. A passing examination proves this to be untrue though. For example, we have the Morning One, deep into the city in its churchyards and parks. We find statues dedicated to this god, simply known as the Morning One. Its depictions seem to be too human to be an old god, though throughout both games we've met multiple new gods, and this Morning One hasn't been one of them. Though the Morning One could just be a cultural idiosyncrasy, that doesn't strictly mean anything in the grand scheme of things. But then of course that wouldn't account for the other cults of the world. It's said that in ages gone by, humanity engaged in the worship of all kinds of bizarre and esoteric deities before the ascension of Olma. Some were old gods, others new, but many of their names have disappeared due to the advancement of time, though each one has its own unique set of followers. In the dark corners of the world, the horrifying truth is these groups are very much active, and take on a number of forms. The Bunny Masks are worshippers of Sylvan. In the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, we encountered some of them mid-coitus, engaged in a ritual venerating Sylvan. Unfortunately, once one engages in the ritual, there's a chance that they may never be able to break free out of their ecstasy, and will essentially engage in sex until they die, or change. From Dawn's backstory, we know that these cults still exist. His parents were cultists, and it's implied Dawn was exposed to their practices more than a child should be, which is to say they never should. One day, Dan's parents would leave to participate in a ritual and would never be seen again. The result of worshipping Sylvan in this way can result in a marriage, a literal union of flesh, where the parties are made into one form, for better or worse. It sounds far-fetched, but texts on Sylvan record society-destroying events, where uncountable numbers of people engaged in a ritual of love and became a sea of pulsating flesh. But that's just a myth, or at least we can all hope it is. But still, there are whispers in Preheville of children at the city's orphanage, mysteriously disappearing, and the priests having an odd look about them. They seem to be bulkier and more childlike in appearance than they were before, but while Sylvan worship is unusual and unheard of in the mid-20th century, it's not the strongest cult we find. We also have the Venusia cults. Venusia is the child of Grogroth and Sylvan, and exists as the god of nature, the cycle of birth, destruction, and rebirth made manifest. According to Enki Karian, the old god is dead, the cause of which is vague, but apparently mankind and its advancement was the root cause. pun intended. But if you visit the forest on the border of Preheville City, you'll find evidence of the god being very much alive. The forest is guarded by owl cultists who are capable of summoning powerful forest spirits that are completely resistant to physical damage. On certain nights it's said you might even hear a strange singing. Then of course we have the various new god cults. Ron Shambara, everyone's least favourite goth, is still active in the world, and we can find at least one group of people dedicated to his worship. If we enter the department store at the ground level, we hear a manic and horrifying screaming. Following the sound up, we'll find a small group of people hanging from the roof by chains. Some are cocooned, seemingly transforming into white angels that in Mahab were chained to the walls of the apartment district. The Heartless One is another new god that is worshipped, albeit in a stranger way. In Preheville we can find a poster advertising a film with the new god as the main character, perhaps indicating that some of the gods are adopting to the modern world they find themselves in, and are seeking new forms of worship. And then there are the oldest whispers, of a god of pure malice and hate infecting the hearts of men, and creating servants who engage in nothing but pure hedonism. But that's a story for another day. The modern world of Fear and Hunger is doubtlessly different from the first game, but if we want to find out how it changed, we have to take a glimpse into the past and the contributions of Enki and Karian, which we will next time.